Hello everyone and welcome to my latest SQL Server Quickie. In my previous SQL Server Quickie I have talked about Azure SQL Database, and you have learned there how you can deploy an individual database into Microsoft Azure. And today I want to continue that discussion by talking about another database offering by Microsoft. I'm talking here today about Azure SQL Managed Instance, and that offering provides you the possibility to deploy a whole SQL Server instance into Microsoft Azure. When you deploy a SQL Managed Instance into Microsoft Azure, you are getting a fully working traditional SQL Server instance in Microsoft Azure, which is running on a virtual machine in the background. That managed instance provides you all the possibilities and all the features that you know from traditional on-premises SQL Server installations. So you're getting the traditional SQL Server query engine that you know since ages. You have the possibility for in-memory OLTP. You can use column store indexes. So you can use everything with a SQL Server managed instance in Microsoft Azure. You have different scalability possibilities, and Microsoft also provides you different purchasing options when you want to deploy a SQL managed instance into Microsoft Azure. The cool thing about a SQL managed instance in Microsoft Azure is just the fact that that managed instance provides you all the features that you know from a traditional deployed SQL Server instance. So for example, you can use SQL Server agent jobs when you want to schedule something. You can use the distributed transaction coordinator. You have the possibility for linked servers, database mail. So all the features that you just know. And in addition, Microsoft also performs automatic backups for all the databases that you have created on your managed instance. So you don't need to care about backups anymore. Microsoft just regularly schedules full backups, differential backups, and log backups for you. And Microsoft also provides you, of course, the possibility to perform point-in-time restore operations for those databases. And in addition, if you want to know or you want to try out the SQL managed instance, Microsoft also provides you a so-called free offering. So you can use the managed instance just for 1 year, 12 months, just for free. Microsoft gives you every month 720 recall hours for free, and Microsoft also provides you 64 gigabytes of storage for your managed instance. So let's switch now over to the Azure portal, and I want to show you now how easy it is to deploy a SQL managed instance in Microsoft Azure. I have already logged into the Microsoft Azure portal, and I want to show you now how you can deploy a SQL managed instance. First of all, let's search for SQL managed instances. You can see we have here that service. And as you can also already see, I have already deployed here one SQL managed instance. That managed instance is the instance that I'm using in combination with the free offering that I mentioned previously. But today I just want to show you now how you can create a new managed instance. First of all, you have to pick up your subscription. I'm using here my Visual Studio Professional subscription, where I'm getting every month a credit of around $50 US. In addition, you have to select your resource group. The resource group is more or less a container in Microsoft Azure in which you can group different services together. I mostly use here my SQL Bash resource group for all my testing purposes and everything. And then you have to deploy, or you have to specify the name of your managed instance. Let's call that SQL Bash MI1. That's just the name that I'm giving to my SQL managed instance. You have to specify your region. In my case, I'm deploying that managed instance into North Europe. And then, very, very important, you have to configure compute and storage. So with those settings, you're defining how much compute and storage resources you are assigning to your managed instance. So let's configure that managed instance. And first of all, you have to choose the service tier. Microsoft provides you here two different service tiers, general purpose and business critical. General purpose, as the name implies, doesn't give you the best possible performance because storage is not really fast. Let's say it's slow, very slow. And normally when you have databases, when you have SQL Server instances deployed into the cloud, you should choose the business critical service tier because your data and transaction log files will be deployed to local SSDs, which are very fast, and in addition, Microsoft also provides you a whole availability group. That availability group is used for high availability, so you can perform failovers, and in addition, you can also read from secondary replicas. So normally, I'm recommending just to use the business critical service tier. For today, to keep our costs low, we choose the general purpose service tier. As you can see with the general purpose service tier, by default, I have an estimated cost of around 900 euros. If I choose the business critical service tier, the costs are already going up to 1,755 euros. So you have to be very, very careful how much resources you are assigning. So let's choose the general purpose service tier, and then you can also define your compute hardware. So as you can see, Microsoft provides you here different hardware generations. Standard series, Gen 5, you have a premium series, and in addition you have also a premium series called memory optimized, and that premium series is also needed when you want to work within memory OLTP in a SQL managed instance. When you just choose standard series or premium series, you are not able to deploy in memory tables, memory optimized stored procedures into those databases. You have to choose here premium series, memory optimized, to be able to work within memory OLTP in a SQL managed instance. Let's choose here standard series again to keep our costs low, and then you have to define how many records you want to assign to that managed instance. The minimum is 4 records, and you can go up to 80 records. As you can see, our costs are again already going up to 8,500 euros per month. And in addition, you also have to define how much storage you want to have. So as you can see, with 80 records, we get a minimum of 256 gigabytes, and we can go up to 16 terabytes of storage. And as you can see, our costs are also going up to more than 10,000 euros for each month. So just think about it, when you are running that managed instance, it costs you more than 140,000 euros each year. So you have to be very, very careful. So let's go down here to the minimum of 4 records. As you can see, with 4 records, you have a maximum of 2 terabytes of storage and a minimum of 32 gigabytes. You can also define here soon redundancy, which has to do with high availability. You can define the backup storage, how redundant you want to configure that. I don't want to talk about those things today, maybe in a different SQL Server Quickie. So after we have done all those changes, we can see we have an estimated cost of around 420 euros for a whole month. That's fine. So let's apply those settings. And then in the next step, we have to define the authentication method. So the question is, how do you connect to your managed instance? As you can see, Microsoft provides you here 3 different options. You can use Microsoft Entra only authentication. You can use both SQL and Microsoft Entra authentication, or only SQL authentication. If you use only SQL authentication, you have to specify the managed instance admin login. This is more or less your SA user, but you can't specify here SA. As you can see, we're already getting here an error, means SA is not allowed. You have to specify a different name, and afterwards you also have to specify and confirm the password of the managed instance admin login. I'm just using here Microsoft Entra only authentication, and therefore I also have to choose the Microsoft Entra admin. So let's set that admin. I have here a few users in my Active Directory in Microsoft Azure. Just takes a few seconds. Somewhere I'm here, Klaus Aschenbrenner. So let's use that account and set that account as the Microsoft Entra admin for that SQL managed instance. So those are the settings that you have to do on that tab. So let's go next to networking. And one core concept about a SQL managed instance is the fact that a managed instance is always deployed in a dedicated, separate virtual network. So this is also very, very important to know. When you deploy a SQL managed instance in Microsoft Azure, you are always deploying that managed instance into a dedicated virtual network. So you can't use an already existing virtual network that you are using, for example, for different virtual machines. That's not possible. You need a dedicated virtual network for your managed instance. By default, when you deploy a managed instance, as you can see, a new virtual network is created, or maybe you have already created previously a virtual network and you want to use that virtual network. In my case, I have already created a virtual network for my managed instance. It's called SQL Bash VNet MI1/managed instance, and I'm using that and I'm deploying my managed instance into that virtual network. So in my case, when I don't need that managed instance anymore, I'm just deleting it to keep my costs low. I'm keeping that virtual network, and afterwards, when I need a managed instance again, I'm just redeploying the managed instance into that existing virtual network. You can also define if you want to have a public accessible endpoint for that managed instance. By default, the public endpoint is disabled, means you need a VPN connection to Microsoft Azure. In my case, I have already established a VPN connection between my home office in Vienna in Austria and Microsoft Azure, and therefore I'm able to connect to that managed instance afterwards through that VPN connection. If you don't want to rely on a VPN connection, you could enable the public endpoint. So then your managed instance is just public accessible through the whole internet when you know all the credentials. But trust me, this is not a very good approach, because everyone can access your managed instance, and in addition, some features are not working without a VPN connection. For example, you can define a failover group between two managed instances. I'm always demonstrating that by deploying one managed instance in North Europe, another managed instance, for example, in Sweden, and then you can define a failover group. And for that failover group, you are getting endpoints. a primary endpoint for your read and write workload and a secondary endpoint for your read-only workload. But those endpoints are not accessible public. They can be only accessed through a VPN connection from your on-premises network. And therefore, I'm just disabling here the public endpoint because I have a VPN connection already in place between my home office and Microsoft Azure. Let's go next to security. As you can see, Microsoft tries to sell you other things, for example, Microsoft Defender for SQL. We don't need that one. You have a few other things to do. For example, transparent data encryption is enabled by default. Let's go to additional settings. As you can see, you can specify here the SQL Server collation for your managed instance. You can define the time zone. In my case, I'm running that in the UTC time zone. You can specify if you want to use that managed instance as a failover secondary when you're working with failover groups. We are not using today failover groups, so we specify that option here as none. You can specify a maintenance window. Currently there's only one available. And in addition, you can also specify if Microsoft should update your managed instance on the fly. As you can see, you have here two update policies. By default, SQL Server 2022 is enabled, means the database format of your managed instance stays on SQL Server 2022. This is very, very important when you want to establish a so-called managed instance link between your on-premises SQL Server instance and your managed instance in the cloud. If you're running your on-premises instance on SQL Server 22, you can perform failovers to Microsoft Azure, and in addition you can perform failbacks. So the failover functionality is just working in both directions, on-premises to Microsoft Azure and Microsoft Azure back to on-premises. But this only works if you set and leave that update policy to SQL Server 2022. As soon as you enable always up to date, Microsoft just updates your managed instance automatically sometimes and will also migrate the database file format to newer file formats which the on-premises SQL Server installation doesn't understand anymore. And therefore you can't perform failbacks from Microsoft Azure to on-premises installation. Therefore, if you use a SQL Server Managed Instance link, just leave that update policy set to SQL Server 2022. Let's go next to tags. Here you can define key value pairs, so the same thing that I have already shown you in my last SQL Server Quickie about Azure SQL Database. And afterwards we just go to review and create. And now we are able to deploy that Azure managed instance. As you can see, deploying a managed instance is a very long running operation. This could take several hours. Trust me, Microsoft is not lying here to you. This could take several hours, especially when you are deploying a managed instance into a new virtual network. In my case, I'm reusing here a virtual network which is already prepared for a SQL managed instance, and therefore that deployment will be faster. But again, it will take some time. So let's hit here now create. This creates now a deployment in Microsoft Azure. As you can see, we are initializing and submitting that deployment, and now Microsoft is deploying that managed instance into our subscription. This takes now some time. The deployment of the SQL managed instance is now finished. This took now around 15 to 20 minutes, so not that long. But as I've already said previously, that virtual network was already prepared for a managed instance, and therefore the deployment was much faster. If you deploy a managed instance into a completely new fresh virtual network, that deployment will take much more time. So as you can see, when we go now to SQL managed instances, we have two managed instances, and as you can see, the second one is here in the status creating. This isn't two anymore because the managed instance is already running. As you can see, when we go to the details, you can see the managed instance is ready. Click here for learn about the next steps, but very important, the status is online. As you can see, you have here now the host. This is the name of our managed instance, SQL Bastion MI1. Then you have a so-called DNS soon identifier, and afterwards database windows.net. So this is more or less the full name of your managed instance that you can use for connecting to that managed instance when you're working with VPN connections. As I've said previously, I have already a VPN connection to Microsoft Azure, therefore I also haven't enabled the public endpoint. So this is the only way now to connect to that managed instance. So let's copy that string. Let's go to SQL Server Management Studio. I'm going to connect database engine. I'm passing in here the whole string, SQL Bastion MI1, the DNS soon identifier, followed by database windows.net. As authentication method, I'm using Microsoft Entra multi-form authentication. I'm using my username, Klaus Aschenbrenner at sqlbastion.ad. I'm hitting connect. I'm already authenticated here within SQL Server Management Studio, so I don't need to authenticate anymore. And as you can see, we are now connected to our managed instance. So this is now a full-blown SQL Server instance. We have no user databases, but we have our system databases, master, model, DempDB and MSDB. You have your SQL Server agent, which is up and running. You have logins, you have your server objects like linked servers. You can use replication. When we go to management, takes a few seconds until the node is expanded. You see you have access to your SQL Server logs. Let's open a new query window. Let's do a select add version. And as you can see, we are running Microsoft SQL Azure RTM version from the 2nd July. So this is a full-blown SQL Server instance. Let's create a new database. Again, just takes a few seconds. We are working here with a SQL Server in the cloud. Let's call that test database 1. Let's hit OK. You can see where your files are stored. This is the general purpose tier, so Microsoft is not storing those database files and the transaction log on super fast local SSD drives. They are storing it in Azure storage, which is more or less very slow in comparison to SSD drives when you're using the other service tier, business critical. So again, this takes a few seconds, and now the database is deployed. As you can see, it's a traditional database. You have access to the query store. You could use Service Broker, about which I have written a book years ago that nobody cares about. So yeah, this is just a full-blown SQL Server managed instance in Microsoft Azure. So very interesting technology, and of course it's a completely different thing as Azure SQL Database that I have covered in my previous SQL Server Quickie. With Azure SQL Database, you're just getting a SQL database in Microsoft Azure, but here with a SQL Managed Instance, you are getting a whole SQL Server instance in Microsoft Azure. So just a different way how to work with SQL Server in Microsoft Azure. And of course, when you don't need that managed instance anymore, maybe you're just deploying for testing a managed instance, you can also delete that again. So this is also very, very important. In my case, I'm not running any production workload in Microsoft Azure, more or less. I'm just experimenting with Azure, testing things and so on for my trainings, for my customers. So in my case, I'm just deploying things, and afterwards, when I don't need them anymore, I'm just deleting those resources to keep my costs as low as possible. In this SQL Server Quickie, you have seen how easy it is to deploy a SQL Managed Instance into Microsoft Azure. The coolest thing about the SQL Managed Instance is just the fact that the Managed Instance provides you the same feature set as an on-premises SQL Server installation. If you want to learn more about how you can run SQL Server on Microsoft Azure, I highly recommend to check out my upcoming live training next week, so November 27 to 28. I'm doing a 2-day long training about how to run SQL Server in Microsoft Azure. I will talk here about SQL Server in virtual machines. We will talk about Azure SQL Database, the hyperscale service tier, and of course I will also talk about the SQL Managed Instance, and in that training I will also show you how you can work with failover groups in combination with a SQL Managed Instance. So I hope that you have learned today a lot, and I'm already looking forward to see you very soon again about one or the other upcoming SQL Server topic. So thanks for watching, stay tuned and see you soon. Thank you.